President Cyril Ramaphosa says the revelation made in Parliament that thousands of public servants have been illegally receiving social grants every month shows that South Africa has a long way towards instilling a culture of ethics in the public service. Zooming in on the culture of corruption and an unethical public service in his Monday weekly letter, Ramaphosa says there are also government employees who benefited from the COVID-19 Social Relief of Distress grant that was meant for the despondent. The president says the government will this month be launching a new public administration ethics, integrity and disciplinary technical assistance government in stepping up efforts to prevent this abuse. Matlala Setlhalogile, a senior consultant at Tutwa Consulting, joins us now to talk about this. Great to have you. Thanks so much for your time on Morning Live, Matlala.
Morning, Leon, and thanks for having me, and morning to the viewers as well.
So, I mean, the first sentence out in that letter, and, just talking to the fact that government employees who don't qualify for social grants on the government's payroll and others irregularly being paid this COVID-19 Social Relief of Distress grant. I mean, how did they get on the payroll? People who deserve it can't get on the payroll. Doesn't that point to, a syndicated, coordinated corruption that has taken root and festered unabated?
Leon, in a very funny way, actually. I think public servants are aware of the incapable nature of the public service. The very people who are supposed to ensure that we have a capable public service in the country actually are benefiting from the incapacities that they, as public servants, are responsible for. Look, you'd remember that the Public Administration Management Act was introduced in 2014. That act in itself was an acknowledgement that our public service needs to be capacitated, ethics and morals need to be inculcated and cultivated within the public service. Interesting that in his letter yesterday, the president mentions the establishment of the Ethics and Integrity Disciplinary Technical Assistance Unit. This unit was actually firstly mentioned or envisaged in the Public Administration Management of 2014, together with the National School of Government. Look, these two initiatives that stem from that act in 2014, this is 7 years ago, by the way. These two initiatives actually aim to bolster the state capacity and also build an ethical public service. So the idea that public servants themselves are benefiting from what they should not be in terms of SRD grants and other social grants, it's an acknowledgement on their part that they're aware that the state is incapable of checking certain things. But the irony here is that these are the very people who are meant to ensure that the state possesses this capacity to do so, to actually be able to support people who are not supposed to be beneficiaries of such in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this, and this is devastating because there's never, I have to say, there's never a day that goes by when I don't receive an email from a desperate South African saying, I've tried everything to get this grant, but I just can't get it. And, it just is, it's between myself eating something and not eating. I mean, that's how desperate the situation is. And where the people that this is now meant to be going to, and it doesn't get there, and it just keeps feeding into the government and people that are selfishly stealing from other South Africans. It's just something that really, it hits hard. It really does hit hard when you look at the most vulnerable that are suffering at a time like this. And these are not isolated incidents. I mean, just recently we also saw a separate incident with the Arts and Culture Minister, Nathi Mthethwa. That story with regard to making public a forensic report on 300 million rand fund that was meant for artists didn't happen. Last week, 3 officials in the Department of Education in Gauteng, over 431 million rand squandered under the pretext of school decontamination. And then, let's add to that, the Health Department suspending its Director General for alleged corruption related to digital vibes only a year in his possession. I mean, is South Africa under siege due to pure, unadulterated corruption?
Leanne, in short, yes, South Africa is under siege from that kind of corruption. I think the Department of Health, you know, instance actually exemplifies what's wrong with this country. Look, even though politicians or political appointees in the public service have actually aided in ensuring that corruption permeates the public service, what has happened is that corruption through public, or rather political appointees, has permeated the public service and in turn has permeated through the party and through the society at large. The absence of any consequence management, or even where they exist, the lack of implementation of such frameworks has actually led to the growing trends of impunity that we see now. I'll give you an example, as I mentioned earlier, with regards to the Department of Health instance. We had a minister who was implicated in this grand-scale looting, the digital vibe saga. But the minister held on for dear life. Even though was mounting, evidence against him, we see weekly, I think, media coverage of the digital vibe saga actually locates the minister, or rather, his immediate family, at the center of such a scandal, especially in the midst of a pandemic, one of the worst pandemics that we have experienced as humankind in the past century or so. The minister refused blatantly to resign, even though people come across and say, look, but the president never really fired the minister. The minister left office on his own accord. But it took forever for the minister to do such. And this is what aids the culture of corruption within the public service. There's no role models that exist. If senior leaders, especially political appointees in the state, do not willingly leave their spaces or positions when there's compelling evidence against corruption against them, they do not willingly leave their positions. That creates this image of impunity within the public service, and this image of or perception of impunity within the public service permeates through other public through the public service and to actually public officials who believe that, look, no one is being held accountable for corruption. People do get away with such practices and such tendencies. Who are we not to get away with it? The reality is, an example must be set from the top. If that example is not set from the top, we're going to see the high levels of corruption persisting in this country for a very long time.
I mean, it gets a little bit confusing as well, because now we talk about, let's just have a look at how government is dealing with corruption. So last year, the government announced an anti-corruption task team as a prevention strategy to respond to COVID-19 corruption. All right. So then in March, the president spoke of a draft national implementation framework towards the professionalization of the public service. Now, yesterday, he said that this month, the Public Administration, Ethics, Integrity and Disciplinary Technical Assistance will be launched. I mean, there are just so many institutions and policies with regard to trying to combat corruption. I mean, what do they actually do at the end of the day?
Look, Leanne, the government can launch as many institutions, task teams they want, as long as those are not capacitated and well-resourced. The efforts will result in naught. The reality is, even though the president mentioned this ethics and integrity and disciplinary assistance task team yesterday, it actually emanates from the Public Administration Management of 2014, as I indicated earlier. It's something that has been 7 years in the making. It goes together with the National School of Government. Both of these initiatives actually emanate from the Public Administration Management Act. Look, what the president is trying to do here, or what the unit is intended to do, is to actually foster a culture of ethics and inculcate such a culture within the public service, it seeks to also capacitate other officials within the different spheres of government on how to instill and carry out disciplinary measures. There's also what we call the Office of Norms and Standards within the public service, which the very act, the Public Administration Management Act, actually speaks of. Some of these initiatives are aimed at cultivating this ethical culture within the public service. But cultivating the ethical culture within the public service will require deterrence mechanisms to be enforced. In the absence of severe deterrence mechanisms, the culture will persist because many people within the public service will not be deterred from committing such acts. Look, the reality is, as I indicated, that no matter how many institutions and task teams you form within government, if these are not well capacitated and well resourced, they will be ineffective. Look at what happened with the ID, the investigative directorate within the National Prosecuting NPA's public director. That institution was launched to prosecute cases emanating from the Zondo Commission, the PIC Commission, the SARS Commission, and so on and so forth. But because that institution is not well resourced and well capacitated, we are yet to see any significant progress emanating from that office in terms of prosecutions. I'll give another example of the Steenhoff saga. It's been, 4 or 5 years now?
Yeah.
We are yet to see anything that happens there. The special crime unit, investigative unit within the NPA, is not capacitated enough to investigate such complex crimes. Look at the Hawks, for instance. In the entire country, the Hawks have a little over 2,000 investigators. Those are the people that are supposed to be a specialized unit dealing with complicated crime in a country with about 60 million people, but only about 2,000 or so investigators are actually hired by this unit. So capacity challenges will always be a concern, especially in an era where the president and his administration are seeking to build a capable state. This capable state will enable us as a country to actually combat the scourge of corruption.
Well, can we do that? Let's wrap this up. We're getting into the 7 o'clock news. There's many more questions, but let's try and wrap this up on the point of the president is trying to get to the bottom of this. Can he do it when it just appears that the rot is so deep within government? And we hear, in electioneering, we hear the president standing up and saying, give us another chance. We know we haven't done well, but we can do it this time. Is that fair enough? I mean, can we honestly rely on somebody like President Ramaphosa to pull us through this and give them another chance to try and fix the situation where it just seems like it's so deep that it's almost impossible to fix?
I think the answer to that question lies not in the individual, but from the party he's from. He's from the ANC in this instance. Is the ANC capable of renewing itself? That's the question that I think South Africans will have to grapple with.
And what's the answer? Can they, in your opinion?
No, they can't. It's as simple as that. I think, remember that the ANC is a federation of different factions. Factions with different or differentiated interests. And for them to be homogeneous in cleaning out corruption within the party itself and the state, it's going to be next to impossible.
All right, we leave it there for this morning. Thank you. Matlala, thank you very, very much for talking to us here on the program. Matlala Setlhalogile, he is a senior consultant at Tutwa Consulting Group, giving us perspectives about South Africa, corruption, and what appears to be the erosion of conscience and the continuing downward slope of the country's ethical fibre. All right, just gone 7 o'clock here on this Tuesday morning.